folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick with camp notes for August 16th, 2023. That's the second day of joint practices against the Washington Commanders. Some not so great news and some not so great results today in full pads against the Commanders. The biggest news, of course, Mike Garafolo reporting that Marlon Humphrey had surgery on his foot and will miss the start of the season. Harbaugh confirmed it, did not think it was going to be said he thought it was not going to be a long-term injury. So we'll see. If it were Liz Frank surgery, it presumably would take significantly longer than a couple of weeks to get back from. So hopefully this is not as serious as we fear right now. Ronnie Stanley remained out. Just protecting his ankle was the phrase Harbs used yesterday. I don't think anybody was really ready to ask more injury questions of him today, but he was not asked about Ronnie's situation that I heard at the podium. Very loud, by the way, in that area with kids screaming for autographs to hear every question, but I did not hear that specifically asked. In terms of other participation, the PUP list has been emptied. Of course, the NFI list now still contains Mullen, Voorhees, Moore, and Bowser. The first three are not expected to play at all this year for the Ravens. Bowser is expected back, and hopefully by the start of the regular season. But that still has some potential good news there because the Ravens really need a Sam linebacker, as we've said many times on this show. Missing practice today. Huntley, Treadwell, Bateman. Now, Bateman, I believe, was there doing some individual drills, but he wasn't practicing in terms of any 11-on-11 yet or not. And if he was on the side. I didn't actually pick up his uniform number anywhere on the field. Isaiah Likely was out. Ronnie Stanley, as I mentioned earlier. Jalen Armour-Davis still not back yet. Pepe Williams is out for a while still. Rock Yassin has been out for a while. Mollett has been out for a while. Amos is out now. And, of course, Marlon Humphrey. That's an awfully large percentage of the defensive backs already out. When you think about some of the really terrible years in Ravens history going backwards, large numbers of defensive backs injuries are often at the heart of those years. Wink Martindale had the famous quote after he joined the Giants of, not picking up your cornerbacks from DoorDash was his best plan for improving on what had happened the season before with the Ravens. And that kind of flippancy, honestly, was kind of unwelcome in Baltimore. But if you look back to 2007, 2005, 2015, big years of injuries at cornerback, and it's a very difficult problem to solve. Ravens went in this season a little bit thin, with Humphrey and Yassin being their two guys, and it appears like they're in a lot of trouble right now with both of those guys now on the shelf. And real questions, which we'll talk about a little bit, about who will be the starters beginning the season. Practice itself was extremely physical again and chippy, with the practice again split on two fields for offense and defense. I was on the offense field today. I watched defense yesterday. Please download that podcast and take a listen if you want to hear more about the defense. That's not covered as well in the live stream, I don't believe, so it might have some new information for you, certainly. In terms of the offense today, I still did manage to look over in time to see that a fight had started on the defensive field. And this was no small fight, not just a huddle or a mass of people who were jawing at each other. This was guys on the ground, rolling around, did not look good. I did not see who started it. I don't have information on that, but Michael Pierce came out of the melee, and it was a 40-person melee. I don't want to overstate it. 30, 40. There were people trying to pull off, so it's hard to guess who really is involved in this thing. But Michael Pierce kind of came out hobbling, then went to all fours, and of course, I immediately am concerned about the worst there. Very fortunately, he got up, still hobbling around, but was stretching and moved to the sideline. And I don't know if he actually came in again for the defense because, again, I wasn't on that field, but at least it doesn't appear to be a really serious injury because he was walking around normally, did not head into the building, which is the usual practice if you have an injury during a camp session. So that is a something we'll obviously need to keep an eye on, and a big negative for joint practices. Love the physicality. Love the fact that some of your top players get a chance to get physical with opponents for about the only time they will during the preseason. Harbaugh says he likes the control, and he did say that the other side of that coin was that you have the risk of escalating tensions between the two teams. And they do have fights occasionally in camp, and when it's just the Ravens between offense and defense. When it's another team, a lot of the barriers to fighting are gone, and you typically have these dust-ups that occur. So obviously, neither side completely happy with the level of physicality that was occurring. All right, let's go back. In terms of drills, I looked at the running backs first. I'll say they did some running on the pad obstacles to start with. That was kind of fun to watch. Really nice to see the footwork of J.K. Dobbins. He looks very sharp moving between pads. It's a lot of this choppy kind of football drill you might see in a movie that even an actor can kind of do. But when you watch J.K. Dobbins do it, he does it extremely quickly. And it's a complex kind of a pad structure they have and what they asked them to do. So that was nice to see. It doesn't appear like J.K. has lost his footwork during his time on PUP. The next thing they did was something that the running back hold drill with trash cans. Now, I haven't seen this in a while, at least. But how this works, and it's just an interesting one, so I want to talk about it a little bit, is they set up 3 trash cans, and each has a coach standing directly behind it. The trash cans represent offensive linemen. The coaches behind them represents the defenders, and the coaches move to show how they're being blocked relative to these trash can offensive linemen, and then the running back has to find the right hole. So it's kind of a quickness of vision or a processing and vision drill. It's well done. And Dobbins had one of the early carries, and he wasn't exactly sure how to interpret the defender or the offensive lineman between trash can and human being. And he had trouble with the first rep, and then he understood. And I think everybody did a pretty good job of finding the hole and quickly bursting towards it. But it was kind of interesting the way they do that. It obviously, and the fact that Dobbins had trouble with the first rep tells me they haven't done this in a long time. He would otherwise understand, how this drill worked and would have no problem dealing with it. But it's probably been, I guess they could have done it while he was out at some point in the past, but they probably haven't done it in quite some time. Moved on to one-on-one drills. Now, the wide receivers and the defensive backs were down on the other side of the field. So I watched the running backs and tight ends versus the linebackers and safeties. It's an interesting group. And there are definitely some significant mismatches there, which are funny to watch here and really make you believe that the Ravens have some wonderful mismatches they can potentially exploit in terms of running back speed versus linebackers, for example. On one of the very first reps, Keaton Mitchell beat the linebacker Farrad Gardner by probably 10 yards on a deep throw that went into the end zone. And I don't think he even really had to throw a juke at him. He might have stepped inside once and then bolted down the field, but it was just too easy for him to gain separation against a linebacker like that. Terrell Burgess, who's a safety, had an interception in coverage of Ben Mason. Mason was nowhere near the ball. I assume he must have ran the wrong route after stumbling slightly. And it was a terrible looking interception where the interception is just nowhere near the receiver. So odd kind of a play, but Mason apparently was not in the right spot. Travis Vokolek out adjusted the safety Percy Butler in the end zone. Very tight man coverage there. And Vokolek, who's a 6'6" guy out of Nebraska, turned his body exceptionally well, kind of had an element of bodying up the safety on the play, made a nice high point catch. Really, I think you saw something from Vokolek in terms of what he can provide to an offense on that play. And that's often the case with a 6'6" safety, is that they're a 6'6" tight end, is that they're just too big. And if they have a basketball background, or even if they don't, they often know how to body up a player and make space for themselves that way, or make it very difficult for the defender to get his hand up to the catch point. And once that tight end starts even securing that football, it's too late for the defensive back to do anything about it. So nice to see Vokolek do that. Justice Hill beat a linebacker, Cody Barton, to the corner again. Speed kills. The Ravens have done a great job of collecting 4 speed players this year who could be great underneath and yak threats. We talked about them a couple times on the show, but Devin Duvernay, of course, is still with the team. Great gadget player from last year. Keaton Mitchell, a new guy. Justice Hill back, hopefully in an expanded role. And he was really drafted originally for just this sort of thing, a speed player who could make things happen after the catch. And then who am I forgetting? Zay Flowers. And he'll certainly be around this year, and we'll do some good things for the Ravens. I think it's nice they have these gadget players so that Flowers can be left with what I think is his primary role, which is taking the top off the defense, drawing safeties to him to create space underneath. And I think that's where the Ravens will get the most value from him. I actually would like to see less gadgetry involving Flowers directly. Let's see. Charlie Kolar had a nice catch over the safety Jeremy Reeves. Mitchell caught a back shoulder throw versus linebacker David Mayo. Mason knocked down safety Kendall Smith on his second rep. It probably was a penalty. He literally ran to the top of his route, pushed him down, and then turned and made the catch. So it was very effective, but it was probably a penalty. The referees were not watching these individual plays like that, even though they're certainly at practice. Vokalek had a drop after gaining some separation, so a non-contested catch that he dropped a little bit later in these 101 drills. That was unfortunate. And I did notice on the far field, there were some cheers for it. It was right at the sideline, and Josh Ross had made a nice PD and coverage over there, so it's nice to see that he has still some coverage chops to get some things done. It's a good drill. It's something that I like to watch, and while I like the receiver versus corner drills, there certainly are high tension and they're high leverage in game. I really like these running back and tight end drills for trying to find out, what mismatches are really created by the physical gifts that certain Ravens have. So it was fun to watch that. Moved on to some special teams drills with gunners and jammers. There's not much to note from these. They are fun to watch, but they're half drills working up to full 2x2 reps. Now, what I mean by that is 2x2 meaning they have 2 jammers on each side and the gunner has to get by them. So there was one rep where a Commanders, I always want to say Skins, don't I? Commanders gunner beat 2, and he got very physical with one of the Ravens players there. The Ravens had some good individual reps, so there's not a lot to say. The guy who looked pretty good, Tariq Black, I thought, and it might have been Sean Ryan. Let me just see if I've got this recorded here properly. Well, honestly, I probably ought not say, but 81 and 82 seem to show up a lot today, and we'll get to that in a minute. And I think that they might have been involved in these gunner drills. Anyway, they're fun to watch, and 2x2 is the way to go if you really want to test your gunners, even though most actual punt snaps are 1x1 or 1x2 snaps. So you mean you have 2 jammers on one side and 1 on the other, and you just have to make do with that. But this is really a test the gunner kind of drill that's well done. Anyway, a lot of fun. Went to 11 on 11, and the Ravens offensive line, the ones is McCary. It's still Simpson at left guard, Linderbaum, Zeitler, and Moses. No Stanley, as I mentioned earlier. The biggest thing coming out of all of these 11 on 11 and 7 on 7s is that Lamar Jackson had an absolutely terrible day. Really ugly. He didn't have the huge number of picks that he had 9 days ago on Saturday when he had, actually, I guess it's 10 now, where he had 4 interceptions, but he did have a lot of overthrown balls, a lot of underthrown balls, and he had streaks of incompletions that were just fairly ugly. The receivers getting noticeably frustrated with the combination of contact, some underthrows in particular on deep balls, which turned their separation into passes defensed. Always upsetting to a receiver to not have that, that separation. He got paid off. And a few other players who didn't look that good. Keaton Mitchell had difficulty securing the football today. He had a fingertip drop from Johnson on a 5-yard throw, an incomplete 10 yards down the field in the middle that bounced off his hands. That was a 7 on 7. Another 25.
Film Study is brought to you by Factor. With the busy fall season just around the corner, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for those jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy. Then get back to crushing your goals. Refresh your healthy habits without missing a beat. And with Factor, you can rest assured you're making a sustainable choice. We offset 100% of our delivery emissions, source 100% renewable electricity for our production sites and offices, and feature sustainably sourced seafood in all of our meals. This August, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door and ready in just 2 minutes. No prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/ravens50 and use code ravens50 to get that 50% off. That's code ravens50 at factormeals.com/ravens50 to get 50% off.
Yard ball from Jackson down the left sideline that he slightly overran the ball as it appeared to me. Now, you could call it an underthrow, I think, really based on the distance and the fact that it was out there not too far from him. I think it's really a tracking problem where he sort of overran the football. Difficult to see exactly. I was kind of the opposite corner of the football field away from it. And that's how I would call it. But of course, I'd like to see it again to really be sure about that. We had some underthrown deep balls that were a recurring theme. I mentioned one to Ant. No, I didn't mention any of these. OBJ, an underthrown deep ball. Aguilar, an underthrown deep ball. Andrews, an underthrown deep ball. The Andrews one looked like a DPI to me, and it wasn't called. Andrews, at one point during practice, got extremely frustrated with the situation, slammed his helmet to the ground after an incomplete, and had to go over to another field, take a knee, and kind of recompose himself before rejoining practice. So, tough day for Mark Andrews. There's been some speculation online about why it might have occurred that I think seems reasonable. I'll just tell you what occurred in this particular case, not try and get in the head of the athlete too much. The guy who did have a pretty decent day was Josh Johnson. Now, Huntley wasn't there, so Josh Johnson got all the number 2 reps, and Brown got more reps than normal. He got half a dozen reps probably today. Did not look good in those. Johnson had 3 straight completions to Tariq Black. So if you want a nice second team connection, and that's always interesting to know because sometimes the second team quarterback has a great relationship with Isaiah Likely or Kolar, and Jackson is the guy who has the relationship with Mark Andrews, for example. Well, in this case, it was Johnson throwing to Tariq Black, and he had 3 straight completions to him, a long one down the left sideline and a nice dig out on a crossing route. So low throw that Black was able to dig out off the ground effectively, and did well. Tariq Black, I think, helped his cause today with a pretty nice day. Let's see what else. Talked about the underthrown deep balls, Andrews being upset. The biggest cheers of the day came on a 30-yard touchdown from Johnson to Wallace. It was down the right sideline. Wallace made a nice grab. We heard lots of oohs and ahs from the stands down there, and that was probably the play of the day as I would see it. In 7-on-7, Jackson overthrew Andrews 20 yards down the right sideline. That occurred after there was a very long wait for him to throw a ball. That's a bad look in 7-on-7. Pick your target, make your throw, get the ball out with zip. It's not a drill where you want to have the ball whistle dead for a sack because you took 5 seconds to throw it. And this was probably about a 5-second throw to Andrews, and he overthrew it after waiting a long time. He threw incomplete to Flowers, 15 yards down that same right sideline. Frankly, he's lucky it was incomplete. It was in double coverage. They had a nice bracket on Flowers, and it could have been intercepted. Jackson threw a 10-yard throw to Duvernay between the hash and the right numbers. That was knocked down by Emmanuel Forbes, who had a pretty nice day, by the way. Emmanuel Forbes was all over the place today in terms of knocking down some balls. Johnson threw to Tariq Black twice more in 7-on-7. Both those went incomplete. One was a PD on a roll where he left the ball a little bit behind Black, unfortunately, and that led to an incomplete and a PD. And then he threw again to Black, 10 yards between the numbers and the right hash, and Kendall Fuller knocked that one down. So really a fairly frustrating day. You'll hear a few positives. OBJ made a catch for a touchdown. You'll hear some positives that came out of this, but not a lot of long throws completed, a whole bunch of underthrown balls that didn't look very good. And Lamar Jackson just had a tough day. It happens. We'll go to camp again and hope he's better. And that's really all you have to do at this point. The more serious news, obviously, the injury news to Humphrey and whatnot. It was not a particularly long practice, so we'll jump right into the interviews from here. John Harbaugh was first to the podium. He described the Humphrey injury as a lingering thing. So Jonas Schaefer and I were talking during practice a little bit, and he said he thought it related to something that had happened at the previous joint practice, practiced on Tuesday. And Harbaugh said, well, no, it's really been there for a while. So it could be a few things. Could be a turf toe, ligament damage, something like that needs to be fixed. But anyway, called it a lingering injury. So we'll see. We'll hear what it was. He was asked if there was anything he needed to say to the cornerback room at this time. And I think that question actually got asked a couple of times. But in Harbaugh's case, he said, they're pros, and this presents an opportunity. They know what they have to do, kind of thing. And there really is nothing to say. In truth, you have to get by without him. I think, if you're on the field and you want to take a moment to low five that cornerback who makes a great play, and in the coming few days when Humphrey is not out there, I think that would be, wonderful and well received. If you need to completely alter your behavior and go into that cornerback room and said, some of you may see this as, the window closing, but the window's opening somewhere else, and blah, blah, blah. I don't think that does a whole lot of good either. And I understand Harbaugh's answer, and it was an interesting one. He did say the Ravens would continue to look for cornerbacks. So there's cornerbacks on the street, always looking, kind of thing. They did bring in a couple of guys, one a corner, one a safety yesterday that I mentioned, but in case you didn't listen to that podcast, it's DeAndre Houston Carter, who is a safety and already was playing some personal protector on special teams in place of Geno Stone. So that was kind of interesting. So obviously they probably might envision a special teams role for him as well as a safety role. And then the other guy they brought in was Tay Hayes, a cornerback from Appalachian State, who's in his third year, so has a little bit of experience so far, and they had him on the outside. So I assume that's where they would use him going forward. Next guy to the podium, Roquan Smith. The question has been asked of a couple of different players, including Humphrey yesterday, which is a little bit ironic. Is it nice to be able to go out there and hit some players when you're not going to play in the preseason? So otherwise, you have to wait for the regular season to go. And he said, yeah, it's great to hit players in another jersey and ones who may not know all your moves. So that was an interesting point. The point was made similarly by Andrews yesterday in terms of going up against different body types. And, he may have a very talented opponent on the Ravens, whether it's Hamilton or somebody else that's facing him fairly regularly, but it's always the same body type and it's always the same individual out there. And it's nice to just try some things against an opponent who doesn't know as much about you as others might. So that was an interesting response, I thought, from him. He also said there's nothing he needed to do in terms of talking to the cornerback room as a defensive leader. I think it was proposed in this case about the current situation. It is what it is. Again, I'm paraphrasing this. Somebody else quoted him as saying they were going to pick up the slack for him. I didn't actually hear that, but he may have said that. Go listen to the interviews yourself, is what I'll tell you, if you really want to pick up exact wording as opposed to nuance, which is what I'm trying to get at with a lot of these. He was asked, I think the most interesting question was about Trenton Simpson. He really commented on how Simpson had been playing very twitched up, that he's learning and he's growing into his body. So Interesting comments, all twitched up. Always you like to hear. Learning, of course, you like to hear, and I'm sure he's referring to the position room there. And then growing into his body is another thing. We often hear this about first year players: is they need a year in an NFL weight room. Simpson, a younger guy, and hopefully he's a guy who can take care of the advantage, can take advantage of having a year where less is expected of him on the field. He'll play some special teams and he'll do some other things, but less is expected of him on the field with Patrick Queen here. So I think that's an interesting set of comments by Roquan about him. OBJ was next at the podium. He was sporting his purple hair. He was asked right away about beating Emmanuel Forbes on a route, and Forbes, again, had a really big day against the Ravens today. But OBJ did beat him once. He says he's still got something left. Said it a few different ways and a few different words, but it was kind of mockingly kind of picking up his legs and exercising with them as he was hearing about Forbes' 435 speed from the reporter. So that was kind of nice to see a little bit of moxie there. Talked about joint practices, providing him an opportunity to do some things that he wouldn't do against his own teammates in the name of keeping each other safe. Again, listen to his exact words if you want to hear what he said, but it's pretty clear that, there are some things where you have a DB off balance or whatever. He's not going to push him into the ground is what comes to mind immediately, or otherwise take a risk of injury to his own teammate in the name of making a catch. But he says he's fine to do that against the Commanders players. So you can understand how these practices get a little chippy with those attitudes, no doubt prevalent on both sides. He was asked about his first contact since the Super Bowl, and effectively these joint practices are it. He gave a figure of 900 days or something since it occurred. I didn't realize it had been that long. I thought it had been since January of 22. So it sounds like about 500 days. So maybe I just misheard it. It's really 500 days, or it's a little bit more than that. But said he'd appreciated the time with his son, but he was glad to get back to real contact. He's asked about the happiness that he had with the state of the deep passing game. And he said there wasn't, I wouldn't call it hesitancy in his voice, but I would say that he was happy. He said he was happy given where they are in camp. So he basically was speaking to the trajectory as opposed to really being happy with how things are going. And obviously coming off a day where there are so many balls underthrown, where receivers got separation deep, had to be a frustrating day for him and the other receivers. And obviously they have to hope Lamar primarily works it out in terms of these underthrown balls. Last guy to the stand was Kevin Zeitler. Always an interesting interview. He spoke glowingly on the development of Saleh in terms of what he brought to the field, how quickly he was learning things, how easily he moved. So very positive in terms of that. Also liked what Simpson had done. So he's not taking sides, obviously, in terms of that left guard battle, but I think he had more positive to say about Saleh within the context of what was going on. Said he liked getting after it in joint practices. They all pretty much said the same thing. Again, in his case, unlikely to play in any preseason games, at least for any meaningful time. So these pair of joint practices were his big opportunity to hit during the preseason. I asked him specifically about how the Ravens had managed to reduce holding calls, and in particular Simpson, a guy who'd been plagued by holding calls at Oakland in his time, came here in the first preseason game, had avoided a couple holding calls, I thought, by releasing properly when the player was starting to get outside the frame. And he said one of the things they really appreciate is having the refs at every practice, and so they get a better, more immediate feedback on what officials might see as holding. And so that was, I thought, a very interesting comment. And I think that was an addition the Ravens probably made early in the Harbaugh era, if not before then, to have officials there at every practice, calling each 11 on 11 play instead of, letting those things run. I thought I recalled at one point at Western Maryland that Billick was actually making some penalty calls on the field. Maybe I have it wrong, but the one I remember kind of famously is Siracusa getting a 15-yard penalty for unsportsmanlike conduct for locking the tight ends in their trailer during when Hard Knocks was going on in 2001. So I don't remember exactly when they switched to having refs there every day to call all the plays, but they're out there. They're making calls. They often make the calls too quickly to really see what they are, but they obviously are doing a good job of giving the players feedback, and that's what's really important here. So anyway, abbreviated show today. I know we've typically gone longer than that, just not a lot to report on what was a pretty darn bad passing day, and the news on Humphrey obviously is not good. In terms of how that might be addressed, I do have some ideas, and I may talk about that in another pod, or I may do it in the what to look for in the next preseason episode, which will be coming up before the Commanders game on Monday. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.